So a group of friends and we took a trip to the Philippines. It was nice. The end of high school. We'd all finally earned our degrees after working our butts off for weeks. But finally, it had all paid off. We'd always dreamed of traveling somewhere exotic to celebrate graduation. After much discussion, we decided on the Philippines. There's something wildly alluring about the place. So Dave, the joker of our friend group, decided to buy us all accommodation at a nice remote cabin deep in the wilderness. We all thought it would be amazing to hang out and just get away from everything for a while. There were 6 of us in total, including me. Lewis, the gym junkie. Jerry, the party animal. Peter, the quiet nerd who everyone defended. And Jack. He was weird, but also smart and athletic. The flight from Manila to where we were headed was hectic. You think lining up at security is bad here? You've got no idea. When we arrived at our destination, I was quite shocked. This was nothing like the bustling metropolis we had just departed from. The air was fresh, humid, and my God, was it hot. After some searching, Dave got us a pedicab to the road that led up to our cabin, and after an hour, we had made it. This place, it wasn't decrepit per se, but you could tell Dave got it for a bargain. When we actually entered the cabin, it looked passable, but it smelled like a retirement home, mixed in with some kind of weird pet smell. Thankfully, Peter had brought along some Glen 20 and after spray bombing the whole place about 5 times, we noticed that it was beginning to get dark outside. So we decided it was probably time to hit the hay. Just as we were getting ready for bed, I was gazing out my bedroom window, and I swear, I could see a pair of glowing yellow lights out there in the jungle. But before I could process this, they faded away into the trees. I passed it off as some kind of animal checking out the new residents to its forest, and I went off to bed. The next morning, I was the first to wake. I decided to head out on the balcony and take in the feel of this beautiful natural setting we'd found ourselves in. As I was gazing out, I noticed the urge coming on to, relieve myself. I wandered out into the surroundings and found myself a nice big tree to, well, you know. I didn't think much of what I was doing at the time, but I would soon come to regret this. After that, the rest of our group woke up and we decided to head into the nearby village to get some food. There really wasn't much out this way. We were quite remote. But luckily the occasional pedicab rider would pass by, so we grabbed the first one we saw and headed on in. The markets in these rural parts of the Philippines are, well, amazing. So lively and full of the most freshest foods you've ever seen or smelled. Whilst we were at the market, we thought it might be a nice idea to grab some souvenirs for our families back home. We stumbled across a stand selling bits and pieces, trinkets and such. Laid out on the table was some of the most beautiful looking talismans. I grabbed a couple, before suddenly, an old lady from the tent selling them approached us. Specifically, me. "The Tikbalang is angry with this one," she said in a cold whisper. A young woman came out and grabbed the lady's arm. "Come now, there is no such thing as Tikbalang. you know that it is just a story they tell to the kids, so that they will not wander into the jungle and get lost." The old lady gave her a stare and looked back at me. "If anything happens," she said, "turn your shirt inside out and run back here as fast as you can." With that, she went back into the tent. "I'm sorry about her. She is my grandmother. She can be very superstitious." I was curious about what the old lady meant. I asked her, "What is tikbalang?" "Oh, it's just Filipino folklore. The tikbalang, it is like a humanoid. It has the body of a muscular man and the head of a horse. They supposedly like to mess with travelers in the forest, cause them to become lost, and they will play tricks on them, like making them return to the same path over and over again, no matter how hard they run or how much they turn." "But why would it be mad at us?" asked Jack. She chuckled at this. "Like I said, it's not real." "Okay, but theoretically," Jack persisted. "Well, in the stories, they are just that, stories. But in those tales, the tikbalang does not take kindly to those who disturb its environment. My guess is Grandma saw you have come from the east. Those tales, they will tell of that area and the creatures that inhabit it." I thought about that large tree. Well, you know. But I decided to just keep my mouth shut. After getting back from the market, we decided that we shouldn't worry about some creature that probably isn't even real. We spent the rest of the afternoon having fun, and eventually, night set in, and we went to bed. That night, I could not sleep well. Every 5 minutes, just as I was about to doze off, I'd hear footsteps somewhere in the house. But I couldn't quite locate it, like it was coming from everywhere in the house all at once. After some time of this cycle, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to go out and see what the hell that noise was. I left my room and I wandered throughout the cabin. After doing a full sweep of the house, there was nothing, not even a fly. I decided to head back to bed, but just as I turned around, I heard it. And then there it was. A tall man, but his skin, it looked wrong, like he was diseased. And then there was the head. It was that of a dark brown stallion. Its eyes looked at me with those same yellow dots that I saw the first day we got here, out in the trees. Its legs were that of a horse, hooves, hair and all. And that smell, it was the same smell the house originally had, before we'd sprayed it. This thing, it was staring back at me, with a crazed look in those yellow, beastly eyes. It breathed on me, which broke me out of my trance, and I ran back to my room. But it didn't follow me. It was as if it knew that my fleeing was pointless. I ran as fast as I could. But just as I reached my room, the door opened back to that exact same hallway, and that thing was still there. I ran again, and again, and again, for what felt like forever, until I was broken down out of sheer exhaustion. There stood that thing, standing completely still, almost like a statue. I realized, with absolute horror. This was the Tikbalang. I suddenly remembered what the old lady had told me, and I flipped my shirt inside out as fast as I could. When I put my head back through the hole, the Tikbalang, it looked confused, shaken, as if it couldn't recognize me. I didn't waste my opportunity. I shoved past it and ran out the front door. I ran all the way back to that village, my legs like jelly and shaking as I looked for that woman's tent. It took some time, but I was able to find them just as they were packing up. The old lady looked at me, and she knew from my face what had happened. She took me inside the tent and began chanting some prayers, covered me in salt, and she ran a soft brush, oozing with something red, all over me. She offered to let me stay in the tent and return with the local church to the cabin in the morning. Truth be told, I didn't want to go back there at all. I began pleading with her. Then suddenly, I realized my friends are back there with that thing. However, she assured me that I was the one who had been scented by the Tikbalang, and that my friends were in no danger. Reluctantly, I agreed. After the sun rose the next day, the local church members and the old lady accompanied me to the cabin where my friends were. When we got there, it was quiet. Like, really quiet. There were no animals, no breeze, no nothing. Just silence. When we got inside, the smell was what hit me first. It nearly made me vomit. It was the stench of blood and flesh all over the house. I could have passed it off as some kind of trick after all I'd seen. Until we got to the bedrooms. Lewis was dead. His arms and legs were broken, twisted at unnatural angles, impossible for any person to achieve. His chest was absolutely flattened by what looked like hoof marks. Next was Jack. His body was strewn across the floor, and there was a large opening in the middle of his abdomen, his internal organs flung out and laying on the floor. Next up was Jerry. His body was separated and dismembered, left laying across the room in pieces, with his organs mashed, hung up on the walls with his own bones used to nail them in. Finally, as we entered Peter's room, we found him in a fetal position, rocking back and forth, his hair a mess, and his eyes filled with fear. He only had a couple of bruises, but with the state he was in, he might as well be dead. Dave was nowhere to be found. His room was empty. Nothing. The police never found him. Whenever we tried to ask Peter about it, he just said one word: monster. I was traumatized by the sight. Needless to say, my friends were all dead. The autopsies indicated time of death well into the night. I'm no expert, but I can read between the lines. They were alive throughout everything that happened to them. As for the old lady, I still have no idea. Why did she tell me that my friends were in no danger? Was she evil? Did she genuinely not know? Looking back, I think she knew full well what would happen to my friends. But she had to make sure that I wasn't going to go running back there. She knew trying to help them was pointless, and I would have met the same grisly fate had I tried. I hand you all this message. If ever you visit the Philippines, beware of the superstitions and folklore you may so easily pass off as nonsense. And please, be respectful of the natural surroundings you find yourself a guest within, or you might just suffer the consequences. When I was about 7 years old, my family and I visited the Philippines in Mambog, Santa Cruz, late in the summer. It was our yearly visit to the homeland. My parents were from there, and so I'm the first generation to be Australian-born. Our family land was a farm, covering about 640 acres. Our parents basically gave us the full freedom to explore its entirety with our local cousins. There was a lone bamboo tree that grew on our property, except it was gnarled and entwined upon itself to create one big bulging mass. We were told that a spirit lives inside that tree and that they were fearful in cutting it down. We of course dismissed it as folklore, due to the Philippines having some really weird ghost stories. Fast forward a week, and our cousins had made us some slingshots, so we trounced around like cowboys and shot anything we thought made a good target. But summer was ending and our cousins had gone back to school, leaving us bored and looking for things to do. We lined up shots near the bamboo tree and missed some into the bushes below. After a few more misfires, we began to hear a thud instead of the usual rustle of the bushes, as if something was now inside the bush. Before we could investigate, our parents came to get us for dinner, and yet again warned us about that tree. The next morning, I looked in the mirror, and my eyes were full of pus and barely open. I could see perfectly fine, as if they were normal. My brother, he was deathly sick, and he was bedridden with no explanation as to why. My grandfather approached us, and he asked us what we had done. I told him about our slingshot volleys, and he leaves to talk to my parents. That whole night, it was terrible. My brother's fever spiked, but he was still able to remain cognizant about what was around us. Shadows seemed to visit us. Suddenly, we heard chanting in Ilocano, a dialect of the Philippines. In the shadows, they went away. The next morning, my brother and I, we felt completely fine. What my grandfather told me blows my mind till this day. He told us that I had probably shot the spirit through the eye, and my brother through its body. As payback, the spirit had inflicted us with our ailments, and then come for us in the night. The local spirit healers, they had arrived and warded us in our room for the shadows that appeared in our room. My grandfather made an offering and pleaded with the spirit to release us. On our next trip, that tree was gone. I still wonder what agreement my grandfather could have made for the spirit to do that. I was born and raised in the Philippines, enjoying my time spent with my family, baking in the sun all day, running through fields of sugarcane, biking through small mountainous terrain without any care in the world. But at night, things were odd. Filipinos, by and large, are raised with mythical and mysterious stories handed down from generation to generation that everyone predominantly believes. So for a 10-year-old boy, the anxiety and fear kicks in when the sun isn't shining. I lived in a house located on fields upon fields of sugarcane farm. It was all processed to sugar and exported out to several countries. We had approximately 6 maids, 1 driver, and a security guard at night to ensure that nothing was stolen or any intruders would come in. Sometimes at night, to make myself feel better, I would join the security guard, Loro, and I would pretend to be a badass taking watch, looking after the mansion and my family. Loro says to me, "So, what do you want to talk about tonight?" I heard several of the barrio kids talking about this thing called a Mananangal. Loro replies, "Oh yes, those are very scary, flying demons. Wings are attached to their torso and it's missing its lower half of the body. They hunt at night for children, because this is what they prey upon. As a matter of fact, I just saw a huge bat that I could have sworn was a Mananangal." The hairs on the back of my neck begin to raise now, as I start to feel anxious and scared. "What do you mean you saw one? That was probably just a bat. Those things aren't real." Loro turns to me. "Maybe you're right, but listen, it's getting very late. Your Tito, he will get mad at me if you're out here too late. So run inside and go to sleep." "Oh, I lost track of time. You're right, I'll go to bed now." It was approximately 35 walking paces, 21 if I ran, which I did because at this point I was scared as shit, hoping that damn Mananangal wasn't real. My heart was racing, blood pumping. I was lightning fast. I rushed up the stairs, got into my room, and I went to bed under the sheets. It seemed like it took me forever just to pass out, which I eventually did. Later on, I could feel a little sweat from my neck that was now in my uncomfortable bed, rolling around it, and I hadn't fully woken up. I don't remember what time it was, but it was loud. One of the elder maids, Miss Garrett, she was yelling weird things. "Get out of here. You are not welcome. Leave us alone." This went on for what seemed like hours. At this point, my light was turned on. I was staring at my ceiling, wondering, why is she yelling? If there was an intruder, Loro would have been in here, taking care of business. Miss Garrett, after all, she is old and maybe even senile. My Tita told me that she supposedly spoke randomly when she felt a presence of some sort. I mean, she is old. All of a sudden, Miss Garrett was quiet. Finally, I can sleep in peace. But then my lights flickered and turned off. I was about to shit my pants. I know no one is in my room, but why did the power go off? Was it a blackout? The hairs on the back of my neck, they start to raise again. I feel a slight tugging on my pillow, as if someone's hand was trying to feel for something. Then it gripped my pillow and my blanket, it was yanked out from under me. Immediately the lights came back on. My pillow and my blanket were on the floor. Miss Garrett knocked and opened my door, asking me if I was okay. I gave her a very shocked look, but I nodded to her, letting her know that I was okay. She said to me, "Now you know why I sometimes talk out loud. Even when you don't see anyone, they are there. I try to keep the evil spirits away from you and your family." My life changed that night, 21 years ago. I didn't believe in those folkloric mythical creatures like the Mananangal, but I can confirm with experience there are evil spirits. 3 years after that incident, I moved away, and nothing like that has ever happened. Until just last night. Miss Garrett, I need you. Please help me. I'm a cab driver here in the Philippines. When I started out, I've heard stories about the infamous stretch of road that my peers, some very seasoned drivers, feared to even enter. Balete Drive. Being the naive and feisty person that I was, I didn't think much of it. A road is a road, I would say. Until my very first drive through that infamous stretch. It was a Sunday, probably at around 11 in the evening. You'd be surprised to know that even at the late hours of the night, traffic is still prevalent in the city. I had this one passenger who was in a rush, asking me to take any type of shortcuts I could to get to where they wanted to go. So, I did. And it just so happened that one of these shortcuts was Balete Drive. At the time, I really didn't know where I was going, focusing on just getting my passenger to where they needed to go. But as soon as we entered the aforementioned road, the atmosphere within my cab, it changed dramatically. A sudden frigid cold spread throughout, and a sensation of being watched started tingling through my thoughts. I looked back at my passenger, and I could see that they too were experiencing this bone-chilling feeling. I tried to quickly regain my composure and focus on the destination. But then, from the corner of my eye, I see something. A person. It wasn't really just any person. From what I could glimpse, it seemed like a woman. Her back was crooked, almost an exaggerated slouch. Her hair, it looked wet and gangly, and her skin was as pale as a corpse. Through the mangling of her hair, I thought that I saw her eyes, bloodshot and wide open. As soon as I caught a glimpse, I knew that I had to get out of this road as fast as I possibly could. So I put my foot down and floored it. As we pulled out of the drive, I sat quietly, still trying to process what had happened. After experiencing that, the frigid cold turned into a sweat. I really couldn't do anything but drive, try to get my mind off of what I had just seen. Out of nowhere, my passenger just said, Did you just see what I just saw?" I froze. I looked at them through my mirror, and they just gave me a look of terror. I thought that maybe I was the only one who saw the crooked woman. As we reached the passenger's destination, I sat there in silence. The passenger was obviously shook up as well. They shakily reached into their wallet and handed me some cash. Slowly, they left the car and closed the door in a gentle thud. As I pulled away, I saw how much the experience had shaken him up. As soon as my cab passed him, he booked it into the building nearby. After that experience, I avoided Balete Drive as much as possible. But that experience, it is not the most terrifying I've had with that said road. My second trip there would traumatize me for the rest of my life. As I mentioned before, I did try to avoid Balete Drive as much as I could. But this one occasion, my passenger, an amateur journalist, insisted that we take that road at night. So as hesitant as I was, I needed the money, and I complied. They were paying me handsomely after all. As we entered the drive, I tried to speed through to get it over with quickly. But my passenger, they wanted me to take a slower pace. Bad idea. Just like that previous encounter, the entire cab was engulfed by a frigid cold. I could hear my passenger breathing heavily, and through my mirror, I could see how tense and uneasy they were becoming. They were looking around, fumbling with their stuff. I tightly gripped my steering wheel, trying to keep my composure. And then there she was, the crooked woman. It was so much harder to not look. We were only driving at a snail's pace. As we slowly passed her, her appearance became more visceral. Now, I could see lashes on her skin, tears on her white, muddy dress. I don't know if it was just me, or her gaze was following us. Then, just as we pulled away from her, my passenger said something that terrified me. "Hey, is she following us?" That's when I looked in my rearview mirror, and I saw that woman running after our vehicle. Her shrill screams echoed through my ears. I sped up, hoping that maybe we will outrun whatever this is. Then out of nowhere, I felt a thud, and the car shook along with it. Again, I looked at my rearview mirror, and there she was, at the trunk of my car, hanging from the rear roof, looking at us through the back window. She then proceeded to hit the glass of my rear window, hitting it stronger and stronger with every smash. She screamed at us, opening her cracked lips and showing her elongated tongue, her growls getting louder and louder as we sped up. Her bloodshot eyes, they stared intently at me, her mangled hair flowing in the wind as I floored it. My heart pounded so hard that it felt like it could break through my damn chest. Suddenly, I heard movement on the outside of my cab. That woman, she was now making her way to the front of my car. Her fingernails loudly scratched the roof. Then suddenly, her hand made its way to my side of the car, scratching and clawing at the mirror. Her shrill screams, they bored themselves to my ears, my eardrums almost shattering with every loud scream and growl. This felt like it went on forever. And then suddenly, silence. After a long moment of quiet, I looked around. We were past Balete Drive. I looked behind me and saw the terrified face of my passenger. Shaken up, I stopped the car. I had to breathe. I didn't know where the woman went, or where she even came from. I could hear my passenger sobbing, a reaction to the horrifying ordeal that we had just been through. Understandably, both of us were breathing very heavily. My passenger looked at me with a face of confusion and horror. I checked around my cab, and there were very obvious scratches and dents all over it. I then went back inside, and I dropped the passenger off to their destination. Needless to say, from that day on, I avoid Balete Drive completely. Even if the passenger insists and would even offer extra pay, I always decline. I don't know why the crooked woman attacked us that night, or why she is there, but I do not plan on finding out anytime soon.